So, all right, it's time for BYOC. I hope you guys brought some stuff to smoke because we have Frenchy Cannoli in the house, Master Hashishin. Frenchy really doesn't need an introduction in this group, but let's do it anyway because his bio is awesome, which I just read for the first time recently. So Frenchy is a California-based teacher, consultant, artisan, and activist dedicated to the production and appreciation of traditional cannabis concentrates. Frenchy grew up in France, but left home as soon as he could, inspired by the promise of exotic adventure and by the imported hashish common in the late 60s Europe. He lived nomadically for more than 20 years, staying with traditional producers and learning techniques handed down over generations. This took him to Morocco, Mexico, Nepal, Pakistan, India, and more, where he spent 8 growing seasons living in caves and harvesting cannabis resin with local cultivators. Eventually, he settled with his family in California, where early medical access laws let him go from hiding his life's work to producing legal cannabis concentrates. Frenchy is also a prominent supporter of regional growing certifications for cannabis production, inspired by appellation rules like those protecting the integrity of Bordeaux wines. And we have a lot to talk about with appellations. Famous for his temple balls, Frenchy Cannoli is a cannabis activist, teacher of the lost art of the Hashishin workshops, and a researcher specializing in the history of cannabis concentrates. If you've been at Meadowlands in the Redwoods for the last 2 years, you will know what I mean when I say I really wish we were all standing under the redwood trees in a circle, holding Frenchy's hookah, watching each other cough and get stoned on this beautiful temple ball that Frenchy always brings. Last year, he also showed up with a French documentary crew in tow, capturing people getting very high. We're so honored to welcome Frenchy back to our Meadowlands digital stage. And joining him are 3 of his friends. So we said, hey, Frenchy, what do you want to talk about online at Meadowlands this year? And he introduced us to our next 3 panelists. So we're very pleased to welcome Michael Backus, the co-founder and chief product officer for Perfect, to our stage. When Michael first began researching cannabis in the 1970s, he was most interested in improving the flavors and increasing the quality of effects he was getting from single strains. 15 years of research and 1 medical dispensary later, he's invented a process that effectively produces the effects and qualities that cannabis breeders spent years cultivating in hybrids, while also protecting the plant's shelf life. Michael is co-inventor of the first cannabis breeding utility patent awarded in the US and the author of Cannabis Pharmacy, the Practical Guide to Medical Marijuana. Michael has served on behalf of numerous cannabis research and trade organizations, including the Science and Medical Advisory Board of Maui Grown Therapies and the National Cannabis Industry Association. Earlier this year, Michael launched Perfect, a new brand of live resin-infused flower with a proprietary infusion process to preserve terpenes. One of Perfect's products is called Happy Camper. So I think Michael is in the right place here at our now digital cannabis camp. Welcome, Michael. Next, we have Laurel, also known as Lo Friesen, who is founder and CEO of Heylo Cannabis. Lo is a Seattle-based chemist with a background in medicine, and as the founder and chief extractor of Heylo Cannabis, a 100% women-owned cannabis company that goes to great lengths to preserve the plant's native terpenes and rare cannabinoids. We're so grateful for Lo joining us from Washington. Lo also in the past has built a research and development department at Eden Labs, a leading CO2 extraction equipment manufacturer. After working with 2 other cannabis processors, Lo launched her company in 2017 with a mission to provide clean, great tasting oil with production transparency. Lo and the Heylo team are committed to education and facilitating community engagement by hosting educational events, concert series, and the Heylo sessions. Her personal mission is to provide cannabis users with as much information as possible. Her products hit the shelves in Washington in 2017, and the company has been awarded 4 first place awards and was recognized by Leafly as one of the people's favorite concentrate brands. Welcome, Lo. Last but not least, we have Joshua Alb, the founder and CEO of Why Not THC. Joshua has been active in the cannabis industry for over a decade. After achieving the highest honors from Oaksterdam University, he assisted in pioneering cannabis-based medication with Alta California Botanicals. He then migrated from the West Coast back home to New Jersey, where he began conducting award-winning cannabis research at Middlesex County College. He transformed his knowledge of cannabis to create Why Not THC, a company founded in spreading the science of cannabis and launching an academic cannabis conference series called Cannademics. Joshua is currently a researcher at William Patterson University, where he conducts endocannabinoid research. His current work analyzes an understanding of the effects of cannabinoid ligands on the human body, with a concentration analyzing the various strains of bacteria known to compromise the microbiome. So he can probably tell you more about that. I'm so pleased to welcome all of you to the stage. Frenchy, why don't we hand it over to you? You can kick off this conversation, and at 4:20, hopefully we can all have a little smoke together too.
So for me, science came very late in my life, actually. I needed to come to the States to first learn that cannabis was a medicine. I had no idea. And that was really a shock. And it changed everything for me. And then I wanted to know the science behind the traditional stuff I had seen for 20 years traveling in producing country. You don't really have an explanation of it. And from that, I started to go deeper and deeper into the science of the trichome, of the cannabinoid. Now I'm going pretty deep in a rabbit hole of terpene, and it brought me to a level where I just don't make hash. I can manipulate cannabinoid and create different aspects of what I collect from the plant. That is huge. For Lo, it's very different. She was born into it, and what's all that generation, what the science bring to the table, it's like I'm so grateful for what I've learned from it, but also it's one of the very, very good aspects of legalization. We can study the plant and we have access to science, and there is young women like Lo that come from a scientific background that brings that type of knowledge on the table. So I'd like her to start talking about her generation, science, what it brings on the table. Me, I'm just scratching the tip of the iceberg, literally.
Frenchy, I'm so overwhelmed. That was incredible. It's so good to see you. Oh, my heart. Well, I would say that most of us start, getting interested in the science of the plant and what it can do for us, because it's done so much for us when we experience it. And as a chemist, I think I love chemistry because chemistry really gets down to the why of everything, every little thing. And so naturally, as a cannabis consumer, I mean, I used cannabis. I've used cannabis every day for a very long time, and I asked why. Why do I feel this way when I use a certain product, or when my dealer could give me one over the other, or something smelled better to me. I until I had access to that type of research, I really was just asking why and asking other people who may have been more advanced than me. I'm sure I would have asked a million questions to you, Frenchy, and I still feel like I do. I just have a different perspective because of my foundation. And so for me, cannabis is such an incredible marriage between medicine and chemistry. And no matter what, though, it's really revolutionizing the way that we look at medicine and the way we look at how plants and the environment affects our body. And so for me, as a why person, it was natural to really search high and low to find those answers. And so I've been privileged to know where to look for those resources and understand how to read a scientific paper and weed through, those studies that pop up at the top of the page that are sponsored by anti-cannabis campaigns. And so I feel that it's my calling and my mission to provide resources to the general public who may not be able to understand those papers or be able to access that type of information. But at the base of it, so many of us are in the same boat where we love this plant and we want to give back to it because I feel like I take so much from it. And it really is a plant that gives and allows us as a community to come together around it and figure out how we can propel its message. And so my role here, and I'm honored to be next to all of you on this panel. I hope one day I'll be able to say I'm doing research that actually means something other than, anecdotal evidence. But I really do believe in the power of this plant, and I'm just grateful to be here. And so my role is that chemistry side, translating for consumers to be able to get more control over their experience, because so many people don't even know the power that this plant can do, and just need a little hint to help them get on board.
So now we go to George, the next generation. We're gonna go through generation.
What's happening, Frenchy? How are you, my brother? Pleasure to see you again, man. It's been too long.
Thanks, Meadow.
Ooh, can you hear me all right? I've been having some problems with having some problems with the internet. You hear me good? Oh yeah, thank you for that introduction. Thank you for having me here today. It's been quite the journey, I guess, through the space so far. I got involved at a pretty young age, I would say, like pretty much almost fresh out of high school. Jumped out to Amsterdam University and wound up finishing top of my class and other programs, and that kind of let me see, on the East Coast and everything that goes on here. I kind of got involved with the space more or less because of some injuries I had playing football in high school. I was supposed to go to college to play ball, couldn't because of a number of different things. But when I actually decided to make the leap out west and get involved in the space more or less, there was a lot of R&D that I kind of saw, and a lot of research and the science behind things that really piqued my interest from my own personal experiences over losing 110 pounds in a year-long period with cannabis diet and exercise, and reading a number of different studies that kind of also alluded to it. I wound up meeting Debbie Goldsberry, who introduced me to Albert Coles, who was my mentor from Alta, California, and together we were able to do a lot of research and help a lot of people. Al was one of the pioneers, I would say, for the space, especially out west, working with Nick Boomer and the ACDC genetics and manufacturing CBD medication for children suffering from epileptic seizures, being the first ones to produce the acidic cannabinoids and full concentrated form, being the first to produce CBN on the West Coast and being able to have that for mass production pre-2016. And being the only ones outside Maris Medicinals to have it, but to have it in an isolated form that you could take and dose, kind of really inspired me to get back into a clinical research setting, jump back into school, and kind of went back to Middlesex County College, where Dr. Falguni Ghosh, Dr. Brian Levy, and Dr. Michael Ansonoff, along with the Rutgers Protein Data Bank Department with Dr. Sutapa Ghosh, we were able to work together to be able to create a project that's essentially drug discovery, with being able to model the interactions between cannabinoids and the endocannabinoid system at a molecular level, so you could actually see what happens when these cannabinoids enter the protein pocket that is the CB1 receptor or CB2 receptor. It's the method that's the really important part. So being able to kind of do all this work and then moving that to working with, Dr. Emanuela Naivi, who's one of the founding fathers of the CB2 receptor, really kind of inspired me to continue this work and look further into the beyond. Like cannabinoids have an incredible effect in terms of not just working with it with patient to patient base, but also throughout this research, being able to work with the NIH and the and NIDA, various universities such as Harvard and Calgary out in Italy, Temple, and kind of being able to put together a lot of this research on, you know, not just like mice, but also in cellular work, in silica work. And it's been a really interesting ride, to say the least. And I kind of really want to continue this path through it. And along the way, I was able to kind of take this science that I've been learning and try and push it to the public here, especially in New Jersey. You know, like, we are looking at legalization come November 3rd. I don't know if I'm the only one from the East Coast here, but I hope more people are from the East Coast, you know, which would be cool. But if not, what's up? And, you know, it's, you know, we're looking for legalization here. In New Jersey would be the domino effect when it goes through. So helping advocate for legalization here within the state, organizing various protests to be able to help with that, you know, and yeah, just continuing that grind here, you know, and helping education really spread as a whole, specifically for the scientific end of things. Yeah. I don't know. Did you guys hear me? Can anyone hear me? Okay. All right, cool.
Your turn, Michael.
How's my sound? Can you hear me?
Yeah, wow, nice place.
Michael Backus, Cannabis Pharmacy, working on the 3rd edition. It'll be published in early 2022. It's been a lot of fun. I like doing these revisions every 4 years or so, because it allows me to kind of catch up on where we are presently. I'm bringing aboard a pharmacy editor this time, and an analytics editor. And so it's going to be the biggest revision of the book so far. I'm really excited about that. I love cannabis science. I love figuring out how a plant works. I really love the pharmacology. I've really gotten into it in the last couple of years. And I have friends in various research groups who are looking at expanding our understanding of the endocannabinoid system, and in particular, how to image it in living subjects. And that's really taken off in the last couple of years. A book was published a couple months ago from Springer with 100 pages on imaging the endocannabinoid system using a PET and SPEC imaging. This is really a hot field that I'm really excited about, because we can start to see how things work on the brain in a human in real time, which is kind of cool. And Perfect is my new company. What we're doing with Perfect is simply trying to preserve monoterpene entourages. We find that these monoterps have very, very active pharmacology. And there's a couple studies ongoing right now in with human subjects, in particular the one that Ethan Russo and Ryan Vandry are doing at Johns Hopkins. And that stuff's looking really promising to actually prove entourage interactions between monoterps and cannabinoids in humans, which is great. And so yeah, that's what I'm up to. At Perfect, what we do is we basically blend what I can't breed in the plant, so we can combine monoterps that are normally not found together in individual cultivars. And what I found in that work is I can really modify the effects that our customers enjoy and deliver them on a spec. So the issue I had for years when I was working with the plant, with individual plants, was that there was so much crop to crop variation that, OG Kush in the summer would be very different than OG Kush in January. And so by blending, I can actually blend to a spec and have everything come out pretty much the same every time. And then, and it's really been really, really fun. I've learned a lot over the last year doing it.
Terpen. So, like, we're supposed to talk a lot about science and the future and stuff, but one question that seems to be really relevant today, it's the relevance of terpene and how much we put on high level of THC. It's like, if the cannabis plant is very much like wine. Wine wouldn't be what it is if it didn't give us pleasure. And the pleasure that we perceive through drinking wine, it's not the buzz, it's experience. And this is very much part of consuming cannabis. And at that level, THC is not that big a deal. But before I go even in a science, when you're a smoker and you've been smoking for basically 40 something years of your life, there is an evolution. First, you really want to get high. That well-being, it's something that you want to repeat. And then the experience of it come into play. For me, it was visiting different producing country when in India you commemorate the act, giving it to the blessing the God. There is an awareness that come into play, and then I started to test it. You know what I mean? When smoking, getting high, it's way more than just getting high. It's that pleasure of consummation. And now I want to, because there is so much that the terpene bring to the experience, now I'd like you guys to give us the science behind, because it's a strong misinformation that rules the market today, and it's not really defined the way it should be. You know what I mean? Lo, you start?
Sure. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. I think our, and I know we're getting close to 420, but I think our society in general, everybody get ready.
Yeah. Getting ready, everybody. La. Thank you. I totally spaced out on that one. 420, everybody. I wish we were all together with the hookah. Next year, it will be up.
We got a light one for you on the East Coast, guys.
Cheers from Seattle.
Cheers I'm out here in Newark, so you know we smoke lots of blunts in Newark.
Cheers from California.
Where's the bully?
Here's from Newport Beach, California.
Awesome.
Bay Area.
Hey.
It's a beautiful day.
Area.
Meadow Coast. Anyone have a lighter?
I miss hearing that.
I have a light.
Hilarious.
Hey, Frenchy, pass it over here, would you?
So, but as Frenchy said, our bodies have gravitated towards that taste and that aroma. And I was at a conference once, and somebody asked if Ethan Russo thought that cannabis was a smart plant, like it had a brain. And he was like, I don't know about that, but somehow it's managed to get an entire species to bend over backwards for it. And so it's doing something right. And I really like the word balance when you talk about cannabis, because the plant has always produced itself in balance, and it puts our own bodies in balance and through our endocannabinoid system. And so really understanding the chemistry of it really helps us understand as consumers how to bring our bodies into balance. And as a society, we're so prone to just chasing after more and more and more, and higher and higher numbers. And so naturally it makes sense that we've chased THC. But as more and more growers are able to produce plants that they want to propagate because of that feeling and that in relationship with the cultivar, we're able to see the natural chemistry of the plant come to life. And that's where I really find our tip of the iceberg, is that chemistry that the plant naturally produces based on its environment. And so personally, we see a lot out of THC, you know, the euphoria, the bliss that it brings us, the lift of happiness. But we really do need to understand that dose. The dose is a huge component. And I think we have such a spectrum available to us that it's more than just THC. And so we're excited about CBG, THCV, CBN, CBC, all of these other cannabinoids that the plant is demonstrating and showing up. And so coming back to it, I think people are looking for different experiences with cannabis, and the way you can do that is through the various chemistry or chemical profiles that are available. And we're seeing a lot more negatives coming from us chasing that higher THC number. And the more and more THC that we get, especially as we concentrate the product, the further you get from that balance that the plant brings you. And so while I totally get, you know, the high THC numbers, I think we need to reflect on that plant and what it's trying to produce, and bringing ourselves and the plant back into balance. And so as we expand our reach as a cannabis community and past the joint, understanding that new users and people who aren't used to consuming cannabis, they really have to kind of awaken their endocannabinoid system. And so again, coming back to that balance, we need to look for more balance in our products. And that's why I've really enjoyed the research that's coming out over the past 5 years about the entourage effect and how much the balance of cannabinoids and different terpenes can impact our experience. I mean, we're having so many of these aha moments where it's like, wow, I've never had cannabis like this before. And, you know, hearing Michael talk about Perfect and the other research like Josh is doing on the endocannabinoid system and truly understanding those interactions, we're going to just see more and more discovery happen around those different chemicals and how they interact. And so, again, we all need to balance in our lives. And one of the best ways we can do that is with our cannabis.
Yeah, so I really agree with what Lo kind of said in the balance aspect. You know, the way I was introduced to this is, you know, just understanding anything, you know, anything in excess can become really bad. I mean, we simplify it there. You know, anything in excess is bad, even something good for you. You know, if you drink too much water, you might drown. That'll happen, okay? Like, and there are other things that can get involved with that. So, you know, it's things in nature are at a certain balance, you know, and the endocannabinoid system really has been developed in the simplest terms as the way for our body to balance itself naturally. And that's something that's really overlooked. And it's overlooked in terms of modern medicine, and it's starting to come about now as being more or less the future, but the understandings of the mechanisms of how it exactly works, we're still figuring out. You know, it's something that I've been really investigating heavily, especially within the last 2 years, not necessarily interactions, but the development of it and how it's come about. How do we see this, you know? So when we talk about, you know, THC levels, when we talk about the terpenes, when we talk about different things of this nature, I have a very different stance. You know, how do we exist in the universe is always how I start off with this, right? We exist because of we are at a certain range from the sun known as the Goldilocks zone, right? So this is the habitable zone. You know, we're not too close, we're on fire, and we're not far away enough where we're in an ice ball. You know, we're in the middle of the zone, and Mars and Venus also exist within the zone. So it's not a specific point, it's a range, right? So when we talk about the effects of actually dosing cannabinoids, it's a range. It's a standardized range based off of actual mean blood plasma level. And your BMI also does play a percentage into it because of how cannabinoids are stored. Keep in mind, they're lipids, so they're stored as lipids, right? But when we talk about terpenes and their interactions and stuff, in order to understand that, we have to understand really simple, you know, what is enzyme saturation? Very simple term. It goes into this Goldilocks effect that we talk about, because you have only a certain number of cannabinoid receptors, right? Like you're capped at a certain, let's say the number is 100, right? So only 100 cannabinoids are going to fill this 100 receptors in that lock and key, that special interaction that occurs, giving them their unique their characteristics, right? If you introduce more than what you have, it's not going to get you higher. It's just going to get thrown off as waste. So that like 500 mg black bars, those 1,000 milligram Kiva black bars you used to have, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The ones that'll send you straight to space. Okay. All right. I miss them. I really miss them. I don't know if anyone remembers those, but Prop 64 kind of yanked them off the shelf. Oh man, they were great. So yeah, it'll get to a point where you can hit these receptors, but afterwards the rest gets thrown off as waste. You don't actually wind up uptaking it. You uptake a certain cap of it and it gets excreted in your feces. So this search for more and more THC, if I'm going to be honest with you, you're paying a higher price to just waste necessarily if you're going for strictly THC. Now, if you're going for flavors and all that other stuff, that's different because then it just gets personalized at that point, And when we talk about the effect of terpenes and their combined effect with cannabinoids, it's not so much as that, and we've seen recent literature come out within the past few months disproving the entourage effect entirely, because there aren't, the way that people make it seem as though that there's a specific interaction that terpenes have that is specific for cannabinoids, that only with cannabinoids and they do these things. And that's not necessarily true. Terpenes have an assisted vehicle with many different treatments. They have assisted vehicles for aromatherapy and assisting with cancer patients, and also assisting with even like if you look on the sidelines of NFL games, what are these guys doing? They put their fingers out with these sticks, right? And it gives them all this energy. It's the up, right? It's an assisting vehicle to get you into a certain state, right? And that vehicle can feel different depending on what you're doing and what kind of smells and flavors and what you're ingesting from there on. Terpenes also do have a toxicity point. So when the people are looking to get more and more terps, that's really not good because terpenes in large quantities can become extremely lethal. So really be careful about that is also what I would say just from reading a lot of this, and it really comes down to personalization. Like it's, what do you like? You know what I mean? How does this make you feel at the end of the day? And that is, what your experience will be. Now that experience is always and will forever be subjective to you. Do we have a large scale data, meta-analysis from terpenes and their effects? Not entirely yet, no, but do we have enough evidence there over the course of, really millennia, if you think about for how long aromatherapy has been around? It's really millennia. But if we'll take modern medicine, Western medicine, the course of these past, maybe 100 years or so, there's documented data suggesting this evidence of terpenes and their assisted effects, But remember, keep in mind, the main thing here, doing the job, is THC, if that's what you're looking for, or your CBD, whatever, it's the cannabinoids. The terpenes assist just in that effect that you will feel overall. So always keep that in mind. And when you're looking at the THC levels, listen, do you want to feel paranoid? Do you want to feel anxiety? Then if the answer is no, don't try and go for all the THC in the world. You know what I mean? Some people, that's what they need. But for the most part, you're just going to freak yourself out. Like, I don't know why you want to do it. You know what I mean? So really just kind of keep in mind, it's about having a great time. You know what I'm saying? It's about having a good experience when you're doing it from the recreational side. Medical is always going to be different, but and even with the dabs, again, be careful, just be careful. That's the biggest thing. There hasn't been enough research yet to prove or disprove in any direction, but listen, you won't overdose and die from it. Okay, like you're just gonna have a really bad time, and like no one wants to have a bad time, man. Like nobody wants that. So just be smart about what you're consuming at the end of the day. Don't even just listen to me, even though I spend most of my time in my lab. Like do the research yourself. Go online whenever you're looking for any literature regarding anything you want. Just put in like the keywords and NIH or PDF, NIDA, PubChem, any of those kind of key terms afterwards. And you'll be able to find everything you need yourself that's from actual documented, accredited sources, and that'll help you. If you're looking for journals, Nature, great, the #1 publication journal, you know, Science, Cell, and yeah, there's a whole bunch of others like Dale Bogart's, like ACS. But again, there are these sources out there that, you know, we use in academia, that the medical community, scientific community really uses heavily, and they're free, you know, so you can go and check it out and see it for yourself for the most part. So yeah. Mike.
Thanks, man. That's awesome. Michael?
Hi, Frenchy. Happy 420. Yeah, I mean, that's. I mean, I thought Josh's comments were really interesting. I agree with many. I am a little iffy about a few others, but that's why we're here for conversation. And the papers that, if you look carefully at how the analysis was done for the papers that disprove the entourage effect, they're really pretty poorly written papers. And they really don't make a particularly strong argument because what they're doing is they're trying to dice the pie really, really fine to look at very, very specific interactions at a specific receptor, but they're not looking at, like Vincenzo De Marzo says, at the larger endocannabinoid dome, the related receptors like TRP receptors and even dopamine receptors and serotonin receptors. There are a lot of interactions there. There are probably heterodimers being formed between these receptors in the presence of many of these compounds and some of these entourages. And it's probably going to take 5 or 6 years for us to tease it apart, given the current pace of research. I'm hoping it'll speed up. But the Johns Hopkins research that Ethan Russo is conducting right now with people in a double-blind, placebo-controlled study is looking pretty good. And you'll start to see it. We're supposed to see it by now. Probably see it by the spring with COVID. It's kind of slowed down the publication of a lot of this stuff. But there's some really, really interesting results. And it's supported by the pharmacology. I mean, the results they're seeing in these are what we would predict based on the known pharmacology of these compounds. And I think that entourage effects are really, really interesting. Do I think they're overstated? Absolutely. Do I think some of the terpenes are really interesting while many of them are boring? Yes. Matter of fact, I use the term window pane terpenes, where the truth is all the person is really experiencing are the cannabinoid effects. And the terpene is there in a reasonably high quantity, but pharmacologically, it's not doing much at the levels of exposure that these people are taking. I also agree with Josh about the dangers of overdoing it on the terp front. I really am concerned by certain extracts that, advertise, up to 20% terpenes by weight, and some of them being really dicey to inhale at that concentration level. And what happens to those terpenes when you heat them to the temperatures that they are occasionally heated to in some of these rigs. The work from Portland State and Bob Strongen showed that you really don't want to get these terps too hot because they break into isoprene units and then they form other things like methachlorine and I didn't say that right. Anyway, I shouldn't smoke and then talk about this, but I'm going to do it anyway. But the point is that with these atmospheric pollutants that are created by high temperature dabs, you should be really concerned about inhaling a lot of terps because they potentially could hurt you. And the evidence for that is pretty good. So for me right now, the whole THC argument is primarily driven by the gatekeepers for the industry right now have a tendency to have incredible tolerances to the effects of THC because they're daily consumers of a lot of cannabis. And that kind of skews the marketplace. I mean, I hate to say it, but it's kind of like if the liquor industry was run by drunks. And so what you get is you get people who can't really judge a lot of subtle effects in cannabis because they're pummeling their endocannabinoids, particularly CB1, with high doses of THC. And so I don't know if they always can distinguish some of those subtler effects, because I don't know if they're necessarily available to them.
And I would say that also really is inhibiting the growth of some users that are trying to find like a specific effect. And when, for example, if a new user comes in, or somebody who's like had way too much THC and is looking for something different, the bud tender or the person behind the counter, they may not be set up for success to properly guide them in a specific direction. And so I completely agree that we need to kind of like throttle ourselves a little bit and look at how we can kind of guide us into the direction of balance, I guess. But I think beyond just, kind of overdoing it on THC, I think there's just so much opportunity in the other cannabinoids that we're seeing pop up in higher concentrations. And so we find ourselves looking for products that are of different chemistry. So high CBD products are growing in popularity because they give you a certain type of experience. Same thing with high CBG now becoming something desirable. And so I think we're as the market opens their eyes to that. Michael, you said the market is skewed because most people purchasing more frequently are looking for those high THC products. But I really do believe that the future will hold great opportunity and demand for those other cannabinoids. In addition to the terpenes that we're finding out are impactful and interact with our endocannabinoid system or ancillary systems. And like Josh said, we have a foundation of aromatherapy research to look back on, but in combination, we know that chemicals in combination create different effects. And so I'm really excited for that demand to grow. And I think it starts with education, telling people about the science of CBG, for example, because then people are looking for that as opposed to just THC. And we're diverting the conversation from THC being that really great euphoria to finding the right chemistry for your body.
So I would say that, to add on to what you're saying, though, the one thing that one of the things that, Dr. Onavi would always tell me, he's like, when we look at this market, how it is from our standpoint, like as researchers, right, we see that there's a problem. And the problem is that it's the same problem we have with tech. If you put it in that perspective, is that the consumers or the manufacturers, the people actually doing this, are way ahead of where the science and where the research, where the regulations and all of that lies, right? So because of that, you have this improper, feed that normally science and medicine will start to feed the people in terms of information, right? That's usually how it goes. We look and we discover something. It's like, great, now we tell people. But here, people are discovering the effects, and then they're telling science. They're like, okay, now you need to look for this. And science has its head all over the place because it's just like, how do we account for all of this? It's these things, and the scheduling of these drugs makes it so difficult to be able to analyze this, because we do have a problem with even with the minor cannabinoids in higher concentrations. Like, for example, right, we were the first ones to have CBN on the market, right? Did you not know that it wasn't just CBN, though? We had to add other minor cannabinoids because CBN in too high concentrations can just knock you out. And I mean, knock you out immediately. Like it can become way too much for people. So the dose gets down and you have to add something else. Can I get into that? No. But can I tell you that this is how, this is like why we need to start looking at this? 100%. And the same could go for CBG, CBC, these other minor cannabinoids people like to talk about all the time. That really the research, again, is not fully there. There's a mass amount of minor papers, but a very finite amount of major metadata analysis studies like Dr. Rousseau is doing. And we need to expand on those larger studies, even though we already know the answers. Like, let's be honest, we as a population, as a cannabis community, more or less know the answers as to where this is going, and the government has also knows the answers to this, because a lot of this is hidden within pharmaceutical patents and different government patents that go way back into the 70s, which is where, you know, a lot of this information comes from for people in industry to kind of go and base their work off of, you know, like, for example, CO2 extraction, GW Pharmaceuticals, you know, one of the, see, nobody really talks about that, but that's a problem, especially when things go legal with IP and licensing, right? So there's like, again, and I don't want to stay too far from the science, but this is really the business part of the science, I would say, when you look at that, because it directly affects the consumer market, you know. And again, people really need to be careful about what they're taking, and, you know, really, again, do more research on it. Do more research. And Michael, I think you could agree with me on this. That smoke is not deemed medicine for the simple reason, not for carcinogens, not for anything other than that, for the simple reason that you can't accurately measure it. You know, you can't. And no matter what part of the plant you're going to cut down and use, you know, everyone, when they test their nugs, when you read that number in the dispensary, or when the plug brings you the bag and it says the number on it, right, it's always the top colas. You always send the best bud that you grew out of your harvest in for lab testing. So those are the results you use. You never really send a mixed batch. At least that's, you know, how we were always taught to do it, right? As from being,
Actually, hold on, Josh. That's not completely true. In California,
doing that, working with Steve Hill and SC Labs. And
yeah, the testers now, though, come in and randomly select from your crop.
Do they randomly select now? Okay,
yeah,
so
yeah.
Things that
most compliance testing, compliance testing in most states is random selection. Otherwise, you get the skewed stuff that you got back in the day.
Okay, so for New Jersey also, though, because this is where I was going to lead into this. So I'm happy it's changed in California. For New Jersey, it's almost the same thing, though. The dispensaries select it, and it goes to the state. The state of New Jersey, the Department of Health, is the one that does all the testing here. You know, there are no separate labs. You know, it's like one lab testing for THC, essentially CBD, and they're not really testing for a lot of the terpenes, other minor cannabinoids, or any of the high-level triple phase testing standards that California has for their for their cannabis. It's not there. And it's another thing that needs to be of concern, because you can't have an accurate measured dose of how much someone's consuming in that joint every time. Like, it'll never be the same. So my question, something a lot of people have tried to figure out with like atomizer vapors and stuff like that, is how do you measure that mg concentration? Oh God, did my internet cut out? You know,
no, we heard you.
I think my internet
We heard
cut
you.
out.
We got you. Well, I see more innovation coming down the line, both on vaping flower, but also skewing towards like vape CO2 extracts like we make at Heylo, and working with hardware that actually gives you a little bit more control, inch by inch. And so what we're going to see a lot more of that, and what that's going to deliver us is not just more accurate dosing for medicine, but also for recreation. Like, you know, when you go to a bar, you kind of know how you're going to feel if you have a beer versus a shot of tequila. So it's just incredible that this plant literally is able to, in parallel, grow for medicine and for recreation. I think that's going to be a really interesting parallel to watch over time.
Yeah, and to also take off on something that Josh was alluding to before he got cut off, there are a lot of atomizer technologies in pharma that are coming off patent. There's a real amazing one from Germany that's used for a common emphysema medication, a COPD medication. And the issue with a lot of the people who tried atomizers for cannabis so far, like the asthma ones, Berner, the cookies guy, tried to sell one in California for a quick minute. But the problem is they deliver the dose, those ones deliver the dose to the cough center in your lungs. And so it's funny, because when Berner was out like showing all his like hip hop buddies trying this thing, they were hacking their brains out. And this company in Germany has a slow atomizer where it allows you to inhale the dose past the cough center. And so you don't just hack it all up and it doesn't irritate your lungs as much. And those kind of technologies, I think we're going to see them in the next couple of years. And I think that they're going to open the world up to a easily titrated, accurate dose of, whole plant derived extracts, which would be really cool.
For me, it's funny because when people ask me about what should I smoke, or I was smoking this and I'm buying the same stuff, but now I really hate smoking because it makes me uncomfortable. I am always telling the people, you're looking for certain terpene profile. There is something in what you were smoking for years that make you really comfortable. And now you're smoking something with another percentage of terpene or totally different terpene. And those terpene bring you into a space that is not good for you. So it's like, as much as there is a lot of science, we are still into sativa indica. You know what I mean? And it's like, even when, so at that level, it's like, so what do you look for when you smoke? Literally, you have to ask the people to be able to give them an answer, getting out of all that misinformation that has been part of the evolution of knowledge that we have acquired. But we cannot just leave it behind to start really stepping in the future. And I think that's the most important. We really have to educate, because the plant is balanced. It's all about balance. So when you push towards something, you lose on the other side. There is no free lunch with that plant. You push one way, she's not going to give you everything else that she could, because she's balanced. Doesn't matter the cultivar. And so trying to push is not the way. Trying to find the balance in all the diversity of cultivar and terpene profiles that we have, I think that's the name of the game. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, also, when you breed cannabis, something really interesting, which is if you start to breed for THC content, your overall terpene fractions are going to decline. And when I worked with Rafi Meshulam, he told me this idea that he'd had for a while about the stinginess of the plant, that it only has so many metabolic resources, and if you direct the genes in one direction, something's going to change. And so, because it's always trying to reach some kind of equilibrium, and the thing that I noticed is that basically, since I've been in the cannabis business, cannabis has average cannabis potencies increased about 10% every year. And now they've hit kind of Cannoli's law, which is you can only push it so far. And I'm not seeing people going much past 40% THCA. It seems to be kind of the brick wall. But the interesting thing about a lot of those strains is their terp fractions are in the gutter. They'll have total terp content of under 1%, typically. And while if you go the other way, like my former breeding partners did, they've got their myrcene cultivars down to around 13 to 14% THCA by weight, but they're almost at 6% myrcene by weight. And so now it's like, now they can balance them out. So they've done that for osmine, pinolene, limonene, all the usual suspects. But the range of THCA that they're getting in those plants typically comes in between 12 and 17%.
I think we're going to see a lot more of that, like just kind of that steering. Although the plant, it is really interesting to see year over year. Like you said, Michael, it's hard to get the same profile every time when you're talking about an individual plant. And so we mostly source outdoor flower, and it's very clear that we can't find indoor flower like we can outdoor flower with such a wide array of cannabinoids and terpenes. And I think that's where we feel like we're succeeding is if we want to provide every experience that cannabis can give you, it needs to be a different chemical profile. And Pat is on here who does a lot of analytical testing, and we're just always seeing new things pop up as analytical testing expands its capability, as well as those cultivars reacting to the environment, which we're seeing change every year, and also growers bringing up genetics that they haven't brought up in a long time because the market is there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because like even stuff that I could find commonly in California and Colorado 5 years ago has disappeared. You know, like California this year, it's the year of runts. Okay. And last year it was all, you know, pastries and ice cream flavors. And before that, it was all fruits. And before that, it was all variations on Kush. And but what's really fascinating is if you look at the chemistry of these things, they're pretty much all limonene, caryophyllene, myrcene plants in just different orders, and maybe with one other terpene thrown in. But they're all variations on the same dance. And I think that's a little bit caused by the fact that a lot of this cannabis is like a trailer park, where it's so inbred that all the kids are starting to look funny.
Hey, at least you guys can get your hands on good weed. We get no access for good quality cannabis for research. You know, like it's very difficult, as you know, within a university academic setting to be able to do any kind of research on weed, and to be able
in the dorms.
Yeah, except in the dorms, right? Except in the dorms.
Some of the great research actually in the last 100 years has taken place.
The best kind of research, man. But yeah, so like to be able to get your hands on stuff like that, really to talk to, Ole Miss, because that's who sources everything for like universities, any kind of studies that go on with cannabis. Really, it comes from Ole Miss, where they source it from. And it's a crime, honestly, that universities, that the NIH, these federal institutions don't use what the many growers here, or even for yourselves, of what you're sourcing to do a lot of these tests that they're doing, for the purposes of consumption. They don't do that, and it's like, it's an atrocity. But to also for the minor cannabinoids, especially a lot of data is now pointing in the direction of alternative pathways to be able to produce it, right? Like a cannabinoid is a cannabinoid at the end of the day. And there are various other ways in plants and things that produce cannabinoids, so really where the future of that minor cannabinoid market could be is then alternative, either semi-synthetic pathways or, something along those lines. And also the cost of it could also be cheaper too, depending on what you're sourcing it from, So it's a lot of things to really consider when we discuss them. But there's so much potential. I think there's so much potential for these cannabinoids moving in the future, and these different kinds of cannabis that are going to be coming out. I really just want to see. Yeah.
55 plus, we just scratched the surface. And I think we're going to have to give it back to Aria. We are in that 5-minute range if you want people to ask us questions, Aria.
Yeah, actually, Hua is here walking around and has a question about appellations. Hua, do you want to come off mute?
Yeah, with it passing?
So his question is, with the appellations bill passing, like, what do you guys think that's going to do for California cannabis?
It passed. It's pretty amazing. The fight was around being fully grown in a soil. Okay, the big debate was on that, and the big win was on that. And since soil we cannot survive if we don't put back life in our soil, because appellations are centered on soil. Genin and the appellations that are created stand on a super strong foundation. We need to do regenerative farming, and appellation become bigger than protecting quality. It become protecting the planet. So it's like it's pretty huge, because It's just the beginning. Don't get me wrong. It's like just the new law. Now what they're going to do with it. But the foundation of it couldn't be stronger. And that makes me really, really happy. And
what do you see it doing in terms of like tourism and like similarities with the wine industry? How do you think it's going to change things?
California can become the France of the cannabis industry worldwide, and the Emerald Triangle is the Bordeaux of the cannabis. It's simple. They're the only place on the planet that is recognized for its quality. That's where it starts. They have the quality. Now we need to know why that quality comes from there, what every element on it. And that's nurturing the soil and understanding the farmer, protecting small farming. So it's like it all locked down in a very nice way to a certain point. It's like there is a lot of power behind that breaking point. You know what I mean?
Definitely. So I have one more question for Joshua and Lo, because Joshua, you're in New Jersey, and Lo, you're in Washington. I'm curious, what have you taken from California cannabis back to your states, and what do you think California has to learn from where you guys are in terms of cannabis, or what you're learning there?
I think that's a great question. What I was able to take back really was the knowledge, a lot of the stuff involving where I thought the future of the industry was going, and I wasn't wrong. I was just a little bit off in the timing. It's more like there was so much that was done. I think that when I was in California, it was Prop 215, SB 420 era. I think that was the golden age of cannabis legally, if I'm being honest with you, because it was, like this immense amount that you could do without having to worry about this federal prosecution now, because of Prop 64 and what that did for a lot of people. And the community aspect around 215, how it was the small people with that grassroots movement to be able to come up and really create something, got stripped. And, in New Jersey, it really wasn't, there really isn't many grassroots things. And I'm sure a lot of you kind of may or may not have heard the news about what's recently happened here with someone who was more grassroots and a lot of the stuff they were doing and got caught up with. And it's just it's kind of crazy because like New Jersey is going to be the second largest consumer market in America, because we get the traffic. Like I'm in Newark. I can see the Empire State Building from my window. You know what I mean? Like that is the proximity to New York. And an hour and a half south from me is Philadelphia, which Curaleaf already has a huge market on to begin with. So, understanding that, really trying to help, especially from Oakland, the Equity Act, getting more minorities involved, and really having that established there. There's a lot of provisions. I think that the biggest transition would be understanding that, seeing that, and then saying and helping people that are like my age, younger than me, people going into colleges, people who are looking to see what they want to be able to do with their lives, moving and transitioning into this space and through the outlets that are there. If anyone's watching this and wants to know how you get into this space, from a legal, legitimate aspect, and you're young, or it doesn't really matter your age, really, go to university, like horticulture degrees and the programs. If you're from the East Coast, Rutgers has one. There's a couple others that are kind of scattered throughout, like Vermont has something, Maryland has something. Go check it out and really try and make something there, because companies will look to acquire someone accredited from a university now rather than how it was before, with more grassroots type stuff. So I think that's probably one of the biggest things is, again, helping people understanding that transition and how to actually jump into this, especially from a science end.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Lo, do you have anything to add? What you're seeing in Washington, what you've learned from California?
I had to move location, so that's why I'm in a different spot. But I would say
to the
that
moon.
I moved to the moon. Inspiring consumers. I think that we're only going to learn and innovate more if we get more heads together. And so, yeah, just inspiration. I think, and fostering, fostering the transition of cannabis culture to the rest of the world, because anybody who's met Frenchy understands the history and the impact that really incredibly open and loving cannabis culture can do for the world. And we really need that right now. So inspiring people to accept cannabis and to learn about the different chemistry and seeing all the ways it can help us, because we're just at the tip of the iceberg.
Awesome. I love that. Thank you. Hua, you had a question. You want to pop in?
Yeah, I mean, this is just an idea, which was, you have New Jersey tomatoes, you have early girl tomatoes here in California. What are your thoughts in state-specific genetics and programs that create more of a holistic patchwork of just quality cannabis?
I love this question. I love this question.
Yeah, we're gonna, to me, legalization is inevitable, and there are definitely interests that want to protect their own specific industry, and stuff has already been staged up. We don't necessarily want to erode any commerce, but California cannabis is, will open up, and so is New Jersey tomato. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
So, I think the biggest thing is that growers, especially here in New Jersey, need to know how to understand, especially within dispensaries. Now, I have toured a number of different facilities here. I've gotten myself be pretty known within that legal sector. And the one thing I can say is that people, if they have a lot of genetics that they're working with, more of them are more hybrid based. They're no true landrace epigenetics. All the grows, at least here, are indoor. Curaleaf got the approval for an outdoor facility, but I don't think they've actually opened up or put plants in the ground yet because of COVID and a number of other things that, New Jersey has back ordered because, as you know, politics is New Jersey's middle name. So with when it comes to a lot of that, I think that, people need to look at their latitude, their longitude, obviously their different conditions, and really choose plants that are acclimated to that. And for the genetics that California has acclimated to its environment, they're very similar to New Jersey. Because you can take New Jersey and where that Emerald Triangle are very similar in terms of the latitude and longitude, and also their humidity. New Jersey was the farming state. Keep that in mind. Really the majority of the population in New Jersey existed where I'm at in that northeastern more quadrant. The whole southern part of it is all farmland. It's the Pine Barrens. So there's prime opportunity for people to be able to grow out here. And they've opened up for hemp licensing. You're looking at an investment of maybe $10K to acquire all the licensing in terms of legal fees. So they've made it really affordable also. And then when we talk IP, now I am not a lawyer, so do your research, okay? But as far as what you can patent from a genetic standpoint, and Michael, I think that you would also know this. There's only a couple patents on actual genetically modified species, so to be able to say that, you can patent a plant is a huge task, because you have to then be able to sequence it, and then patent that.
There's a plant
patent. So how would you, because I've seen only a couple that have been patented, corn was the one that was, I think, by Monsanto or something. Was it Monsanto or something like that? So patenting the genetics, that's the one thing that I think is the harder part people have to overcome, because of that uncertainty of, are you able to, are you not, under a patent, a trademark for the name, something along those lines. So what would you think, Michael? Yeah.
Yeah, there are plant patents, which means that, and there are a bunch of them for cannabis now, where people take a specific clonal cultivar, clonally propagated, meaning from a cut, and you can get a patent on it. You have to describe it really well. You don't even have to sequence it. You just have to describe the morphology and the chemistry. And you have to show that it's relatively stable, crop to crop, meaning cut to cut, which is pretty easy to do. That's one level of patents. Now, what you're talking about with companies like Monsanto, is they're genetically modifying the plant specifically to be able to withstand poisonous herbicides.
Got you. Okay,
And then they
so
get a
that's what
patent
it
on that.
is.
Now, we don't need to really do that in cannabis because we don't have to use a lot of chemicals in the production of cannabis, and we shouldn't. And so, and you've seen it in tobacco to some degree also. But again, these are, for lack of a better term, evil industries, and cannabis doesn't have to become one of those. But you can get protection from the government for a plant you breed, and it's not crazy expensive. You don't spend $1 million to do it. The company I used to work for got a much broader patent on cannabis for cannabis that produced both THC and CBD with very low myrcene. Because when I worked on that patent about 10 years ago, every single high CBD, high THC together plant was all myrcene. There was nothing else in it. So we bred all these plants that had different terpene profiles, and the government gave us a patent on it. And then I walked away from that company because I can do more with blending than they can do with breeding.
That's great though. I didn't. So, question then on that. Is that patent? Is that only the levels of how patents can go? There's the domestic, and then there's also the global. That you could look for. Is this?
So
you can apply? Yeah.
Yeah, and some, it's easier in some. I mean, some countries you don't even want to bother applying because they're just going to ignore your patent anyway. So if you apply in China,
yeah,
don't care because they have a different approach to IP.
So yeah, it's a great actually. Thank you for that.
I think otherwise the future, every one of those regions that grow sun-grown will have cultivars that will be adapted to the land. When you can breed outside and you bring first genetics that have a good chance to survive well, then if any one of them thrive, you start breeding with it. The plant is going to become an heirloom. It will slowly adapt to the land. And every part of the land is going to nurture a very specific plant with a very specific terpene profile. So it's not really where you are. It's like the terroir is the world is a terroir. There is not two plants that was born not one plant that was born in two different places on the planet. That's the power of that specific place. When you put the right genetic, it will adapt really well. Then you put the knowledge to help, and then you have the terroir, you have the land, the climate, a genetic adapted to the land, and the know-how. It's like it's all to be made, but it's definitely the future.
For sure. And I mean, I think that the one thing that we haven't really seen yet is because there's still so much cannabis prohibition in the United States, a lot of the areas that might actually really grow really interesting cannabis really haven't had a shot yet. I mean, cannabis was a riverine plant, meaning that originally it was found, and humans found it near rivers in Central Asia. And there are a lot of river systems in the United States, the banks of which have proved to be very fertile agricultural land that potentially could be amazing places to grow cannabis, especially to see how that cannabis would adapt. So I'd love to see cannabis grown in North Carolina and Tennessee and some states that are pretty far away from growing it right now, but actually would provide an environment that would probably have really spectacular results.
Yeah, North Carolina. I was actually at a conference last year and got to meet the chief science officer from Anazyme, based out of North Carolina. And they are, North Carolina has great conditions, and especially for the hemp production and what they're looking to do. Like 100%, the farming conditions there are incredible. And I think there's a lot of areas in the United States that have been way overlooked that can have a lot of potential, especially because of how resilient the plant is. And how much you can do with it. There's so much that people can expand on, and a lot that it can hold.
The terroir goes from Alaska to South Africa. Simple. That plant can adapt in all those places, thrive, and give you something unique. That's how powerful that plant is.